Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to, well, I guess you've been to Tech Ed for a while now. Hope you're all having a good time and learning a lot. I'm actually very excited about giving this particular session. I'll go ahead and jump to it. Mostly because what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be focusing both on SQL Server 2005 and building some reports that are kind of common questions that we get on both the news groups and the discussion groups. Things that aren't as easy to figure out how to do and aren't actually all that easy to do. As well as, and I'm very excited to show this, and I'm kind of waiting for this all year, give you a first glimpse at SQL Server 2008 reporting services and a lot of the great stuff we've been working on for actually over a year and a half. We started working on many of the things you're going to see today. Well, before we shipped 2005, we were getting started, and we've just now got to the point where we can start to show them. And actually, this particular build I picked up late last night, so many of the people even on my team haven't used this build. So it'll be kind of interesting to go through the features. The product clearly is not quite done yet, but I wanted to give you guys an advanced look and show you what we're looking at doing and providing in terms of flexibility and features for authoring in SQL Server 2008. What I want to start off with is kind of going through the different types of reports that are commonly asked of us, like how do I build these? These are things that come up, and they're just not all that easy to figure out. One example of that is looking at within a table, for example, on the upper left here, where we have dynamic and static columns. So what I've got is a table that's showing me, state, city, population, and area. But one of my columns, one of the pieces of data that I want to show, also happens to be dynamic, i.e. it grows across columns. We want to pivot on that value. And right now, of course, you can either use a matrix, which allows for dynamic columns and dynamic rows, or you can use a table, which only allows for dynamic rows, but also has static columns. So I'll show you a way of kind of getting this behavior to work as well as possible given SQL Server 2005 functionality. Another common thing is people want to be able to show parallel dynamic groups. So what you've got, of course, is a matrix, and you've got dynamic rows, Washington, Oregon, but you also want to be able to show both year and product hierarchies, which are both dynamic, and you want to show those both on columns. Again, with today's matrix, you can only show a single hierarchy on each axis. Other types of reports that we commonly run into are, within a matrix, one of the key challenges is that you can't control the subtotals. They're automatic, which is nice. It makes it very easy to do, but you can't have different subtotals than you have in the details. So in this particular example on the upper left, what you have is detailed data in your matrix and in the field, but for your subtotal, it would make no sense to show professor because, of course, there's going to be many professors, and right now we would show the first one, which, of course, would be just completely arbitrary. But what you want to be able to do, of course, is have the dynamic columns. You want to have quarter 1 and quarter 2 shown for your entire set, but simply not show the professor in the total area. And the last one is probably the most common, which is with a matrix today, the standard way of setting it up is what we call a block structure, which means you take up a lot of room, right? It allows for groups on the far left to go ahead and use up space as you have nesting of that hierarchy down the rows. What a step matrix allows you to do is go ahead and collapse that and use much less space to show the actual row hierarchy. And you can do that on both rows and columns, and I'll show you how to do that as well. So if you've ever been to any of my sessions before, I do them most commonly for report authoring. Almost all of it's demos. So I'll be doing basically 2 demonstrations today. I won't spend a lot of time on the slides. You get a copy of the slides. There are details in there about what I'm doing, so it'll describe it. But again, what I want to do is go ahead and show it to you. So what I have here is, of course, the report designer in Visual Studio 2005 or in the BI Development Studio that comes with SQL Server. And I've got 2 matrices. So I've got my standard report, and if I go ahead and preview that, that's a very nice, I spent a little time adding colors and all the other fun stuff. And we've got basically what it amounts to a stepped or a blocked matrix. It's the standard matrix you get if you were to just drag things on. And of course, I've turned on visibility, so I can go ahead and show hide both rows and columns. And of course, as I expand this out, it all makes perfect sense. But when it's all collapsed, you know, it uses up a bunch of space on columns, as well as you see things like total. That doesn't add a lot of value. It's a kind of space that you don't want to go ahead and use. So what I'll show you is going ahead and taking that, and let's go ahead and make this a stepped matrix instead of a blocked matrix. It's relatively straightforward, but you have to kind of know which settings to go ahead and set. So the first thing you do is, what you want to do is take your outer group, in this case it's the product category, and I'm simply going to take the value here, and I'm going to cut it, so I've actually removed it from the field, so this field no longer shows anything. And I'm going to put it in the subtotal. So instead of saying total, it's actually going to show the product category value. The next thing you need to do, and I don't know how many of you guys, probably all of you, have figured out the little green triangle. I'd give you the name and address of the guy that came up with that, but I'm afraid you'd probably heard him. Not a very usable feature. We absolutely agree, and we've certainly improved that in the next version. But you do have to click on the little green triangle. Of course, what the little green triangle does is it gives you the formatting of style properties for the subtotal. So you can, in 2005, modify the style of the subtotal separately from the data in the details or in the field, but you have to figure out how to click on this little green triangle. And what I want to do here is I simply want to go ahead and take the position of the details of the subtotal, and I want to put them before the details instead of after the details. So all I'm going to do is change that to before. So now it will come before it shows the details. And the next thing I want to do is go ahead, and since they're now in the same column, both the category and the subcategory, I want to go ahead and indent the subcategory. So to do that, it's pretty straightforward. You simply go into the padding, and I'll specify, you can pick any number you want, of course. I like 20. So I'll put a left pad on this and go ahead and bump it out to 20 pixels in this case, I believe, so that it's indented further than the product category. And the last thing I want to do is go ahead and get rid of this column. Now, in 2005, the matrix doesn't allow you to delete the column, so what you need to do is go ahead and just get rid of all the space. And the smallest we allow you to go is 0.0125. So go ahead and put a 0 there. And that'll go ahead and collapse that down as far as possible. Notice what I did leave in there was the total value, and that total will go ahead and show. So if I was to go ahead and now, if I've done everything, I remembered everything, preview this. Oh, I did want to move one thing. So what I had previously in this column was that it had the interactivity set, right? So the show and hide of the columns was based on clicking on the value of the product category. And so what I want to do is go ahead and switch that. So I want to switch it to text box 5 now, which is the new product category, which used to be the total column or the total text box. So I'll simply go into here into the properties for the group, not the text box, and change the visibility instead of being product category to be text box 5. And now, again, when I go ahead and preview this, we'll still have our interactivity, so we'll be able to drill down. But you notice all those little totals are gone, as well as if we go ahead and expand accessories, you'll see that we're indented. We have our subtotals at the top now, and we have our data in the field itself. Now, another thing you can do is basically do the same thing on columns. So if you take a look at this report, of course, on columns, I generally do it a little bit differently. We've got this, and it says 2003 total, 2004 total. Again, not all that valuable. But what I want to go ahead and do here on columns is something slightly different. The first part's the same, so I'll go ahead and take the year value, and I'll replace it in the total. But in this case, I'll, of course, remove it from up here. I simply want to go ahead and shrink this column down. So not before and after. I don't need to change anything there. I'll go ahead and change the height. And I didn't change the interactivity either. And so what I get now is it just says 2003, 2004. But when I go ahead and expand on columns, the 2003 moves over to the 2003 total area. And I've got the interactivity, again, using up less space. So it's just one way of kind of providing a little bit more condensed view of a matrice using the stepped versus the block style. Again, both of them are, of course, very common. Now, very quickly, what I want to go ahead and do is the same thing to this matrix, so they're built the same. You can see all the operations again, just so easier to remember. Setting it before. This is text box 12. Collapsing our rows, and then, of course, doing the same thing on columns. And now, again, if I've done everything right, we'll have two matrices, both stepped, both with interactivity. Oh, I didn't do my padding. So one last thing. And there we go. Now, another common thing, as I showed you in the example reports, was a desire to have both two sets of dynamic columns, so parallel dynamic columns. What I want to see in this case, so I'll go back to my report here. What I want to see is accessories, bikes, clothing for 2003, 2004, followed by Europe, North America, and Asia, because I have the same x-axis, or in this case y-axis, I guess, rows. There's no reason that I couldn't have them next to each other and go ahead and take a look at them in a wider view. So to do that in 2005, and again, this is a kind of a hack, but I've used it internally. I know when I build reports, even for my team, one of the things I like to look at are the number of bugs in the product as we're getting ready for a release, and I like to look at them both by priority and severity at the same time, and kind of take a look at, based on priority, how many bugs do we have at each particular area. But then for the same thing, I want to see the severity. Now, they're somewhat related, but they're very different, right? Just because it's a high priority item doesn't necessarily mean it's high severity and vice versa. So in this case, what you need to do, and you can do this for both tables. So in my examples, I had both parallel dynamic groups as well as static columns and dynamic columns. Well, if I wanted a dynamic column and a static column, I would use a table and a matrix together. In this case, I want two dynamic columns, so I'll use two matrices together. And what you need to do is, not too hard, go ahead and stick them next to each other. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is sticking them next to each other, this might look like absolutely the right thing to do. And of course, because you don't want to see the rows anymore for the second matrix, you can go ahead and delete the text. And collapse the column. But just to show you first that unfortunately doesn't give you exactly what you're looking for. So there's a couple more things you need to do. First of all, you'll see that it's way over to the right. Well, why is it way over to the right? Well, the interesting thing is with a matrix, the total area, the subtotal area, doesn't take up space in the body. So if you're thinking about it in terms of the space that exists for your report, this space in this column doesn't really exist in terms of the RDL definition itself. It's simply there in the report designer so that you can go ahead and specify formatting. So what you need to do is go ahead and overlap these items because they're not really there. So you take this matrix and you simply drop it right over the total area. Now, I think in this case I need to move it over just slightly. They can't completely overlap. You can't overlap the real space. So, for example, if I do go ahead and move it back over, you'll see what happens is that they're actually overlapping. And in HTML, we don't allow overlapping items, so it works, kind of works here, i.e. you can't see the underlying matrix, but they do overlap. And what you really want, of course, is simply to move it over so that when you go ahead and preview it, you can now see both of them side by side. But it's still not right. In this case, what's happening, of course, is that we're growing on the columns and we're growing on the rows. In fact, if I was to go ahead and expand this, you can see another problem. I can expand one matrix, but I can't expand the other one. So one of the problems with this approach, one of the limitations, is that you really can't do expand and collapse on rows, because what you need, of course, for them to do is always line up. You could turn it on and have people always have to keep them in sync, but not always the easiest thing for a user to go ahead and use. So what I need to do to make this work is to do two things. One is you need to turn off can grow. Because they're independent matrices, you need the space to be exactly the same always. And of course, can grow causes that to be different. So we'll go ahead and make a little bit more room so that the text can always be seen. And then we will simply turn off can grow on all of these text boxes. So that they won't grow vertically. The next thing we need to do, of course, is go ahead and turn off the interactivity on both of them. Now, keep in mind that this one, of course, now is very small, and you can use your keyboard to mouse over to it and then edit the group. And now we should have our side-by-side matrices. Looks like the can grow didn't quite turn off on the upper column, probably the one that's hidden. Oh, I know what I did. I left the total in there. So over here we have the value total. No, that should I'll fix that in a second. The other thing, of course, if we go ahead and preview this, we're seeing the total here in the left-hand matrice. But of course, in general, you want your total to be on the far right. So we want to go ahead and turn that off because we no longer need it. So to go ahead and do that, we'll simply go up to our group for year and turn off our subtotal. There we go. And now if I go ahead and preview this, we should have everything aligned. We have our total. We still have the good part about this particular workaround is you can have column-based interactivity, of course. And things go ahead and move out of the way. But you can't really do it on rows again. The last thing I want to show you is in some reports, what you wanted to have were those detail items in the kind of in the body of the matrix, but not show up in the subtotals. So the way you can do that in 2005, again, not a perfect solution, but it does work specifically in the case where the values simply don't make any sense. For example, with the professor. I don't have that particular example here, but I can show you how to do it. And one way to do it is, if, for example, if I was going to, I've got profit here. So when I go ahead and preview my report, we'll see that we've got the profit. But let's say I don't want to show profit in the subtotal. What I want to do is only show it in the details. So one way of doing that is simply to go into, for both of these columns, and set the visibility. Another thing is to set the value. Either one would work. Visibility completely hides the entire text box, whereas value would hide just the value itself. So we'll go ahead and go into visibility here. The reason I'm going to show visibility, even though value is probably a better way of doing it, is that the value is already a complicated expression, and I really want you to focus on the expression I'm showing you for hiding it, not so much the expression for actually calculating the profit itself. So I'll go in here to the visibility, and I'll make that an expression. So the expression I want is kind of an advanced functionality is called in-scope. And what InScope does in a matrix or in any data region is it tells you via code what scope you're in, i.e. what grouping you're in. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is say if, and in this case I'm going to do InScope. And what you specify for InScope is where you are. So what I want to have is the, go ahead and cancel. And what I want to do is go ahead and choose this group. So this group is the quarter. And the quarter name is matrix 3 quarter. So we know what that is. And so we'll go ahead and grab these two text boxes again. And for visibility, I'm going to say if we're in the scope of the quarter. So what that means is if we're in the scope of the year, i.e. we're at the subtotal level, we're not at the detail level, then we can do a different behavior. So if we're in the scope of the quarter, so we're showing the quarter details, of course, and the year details, but not in the subtotal of year, what I want to do is go ahead and make profit visible. So in that case, it's false. It's not hidden. Otherwise, I want to go ahead and show it. So now if I go ahead and preview my report, you'll see that at the subtotal level, all of those values are hidden because they make no sense, if this was the case. And when I go ahead and expand it, they are visible. So it does allow you to do some of these types of reports that I showed you earlier on that you may need to go ahead and use, but they're not perfect solutions. So for example, we can't currently get rid of this space. It's just not an available expression that you can put in. You could have the color still line up. You could just hide the value, but the space itself would unfortunately still be there. What that means, of course, is that the inverse is not true. It's very difficult to have something only show up in subtotals and not in the details, because what will end up happening, of course, is that in the details, it will still take up all of that space. It'll certainly show in the subtotals, but you'll end up wasting all of that interior space, so it's not as useful in that particular scenario. And with that, I think I'll go back to the slides. Just again wanted to show you a couple of things with 2005. What I have here in the slides is text about kind of how to do these things that I've just shown you, parallel groups specifically. Key thing to keep in mind are those limitations. Interactive sorting, not so good on rows. Using, you will take up some, I don't think I actually mentioned this. There will be a little bit of additional space. You can't get rid of a column entirely, so it only goes down to 0.125 inches. The other thing is you can go ahead and get those matrices just a little bit closer, or the tables a little bit closer, by changing the grid settings of your report to be a smaller value, so you can get them right up next to each other. Just another way of making them disappear a little bit more. Stepped matrix, again, a very simple thing to do, provided you know all the steps. Don't forget the green triangle. Allows you to go ahead and set a number of style properties for the subtotal itself. And then, of course, the last thing I just showed, using the InScope function. And, of course, the InScope function can be used for many things, because it does give you a lot of information when you're in a matrix for having expressions. And one of the ways, of course, you can take advantage of it is to go ahead and conditionally hide things based on where you are grouping-wise. The next thing I want to spend the rest of the time on, of course, is showing you SQL Server 2008 reporting services and all of the different types of report authoring you can do, as well as what I'm going to show you is our new report authoring tool. But the first thing, of course, is a big thing that's going to be in 2008 is Microsoft has acquired Dundas technology. It was announced at the keynote, and I showed a quick demonstration of it yesterday in the CatBuy overview, or the SQL Server 2008 overview. And what I wanted to go ahead and show you is that we don't have all of it hooked up. We just purchased the company a couple of weeks ago. I'm going to be able to show you some things that we've already got integrated. We're moving very, very quickly. But I want to show you kind of the breadth of things that you can look at if you're not familiar with what Dundas provides today. So taking a look here, a number of different charting things that you can't quite do, or you can't do in today SQL Server 2005 reporting services. For example, on the upper left-hand side, what we're showing is access breaks. So what we have, of course, is data that is where a couple of columns are very much different in values. The delta between values is very high. And what access breaks, of course, allows you to do is go ahead and see the details of the items that are at a lower scale, as well as see the fact that those values are much higher. And you can have multiple access breaks in a single chart. Another thing on the bottom right is right now in 2005, we allow you to have a mixed chart type. You can have a line chart and some other chart, like a bar chart. But we only allow you to do a line. And that's really the only option for kind of mixing chart types together. With Dundas and with the new technology we'll have in 2008, we'll enable many, many different types of mixed charts. So you could have area charts mixed with bar charts, mixed with line charts, mixed with bubble charts, mixed with scatter. You know, basically, your options are almost endless. Another example, certainly higher-end 3D types of layouts, as well as multiple charts. So if you want to have multiple plot areas on a single chart, we can go ahead and have all of that set up as well. Another thing we've acquired with the charting enhancements were an entire gauge library. So, of course, the most common thing, I think, for using gauges within reports is to go ahead and show key performance indicators or different ways of what type of values you're actually looking at. But there are unique ones, for example, like the clock there. And there's obviously some very large gauges as well as unique ones for showing, you can specify a lot of these values, like for what they say, wouldn't obviously pressure in this case. It could show sales in terms of a graph. And then lastly, what you saw in the keynote itself was mapping technology. So we'll be incorporating the ability for you to go ahead and, a map is one way of looking at a map, and certainly the way we're going to implement it is it's just simply a different type of chart. So what it does, it allows you to show your data in geospatial relationship to each other in a form that, of course, is familiar to whatever you're trying to display your data in. So clearly showing it within countries or counties or cities, but you can also create your own maps. So if what you wanted to do was, I want to map out the convention center, and you have all the rooms, you actually see them outside, you could supply those maps and then map out where each one of the rooms are in each one of the sessions and color code them and everything else and have that available in a report. So it doesn't have to be just geography. It can be, whatever space you want to go ahead and describe. And of course, we're going to integrate that with a number of the charting features to allow you to really have a great way of visualizing data in this form. Another thing that, of course, allow you to do with SQL Server 2008, the relational database, is we now have the new spatial data type. You'll be able to integrate those two items so that you can go ahead and suck the data out of your spatial data type. And if you saw the demonstration yesterday for the overview of CAT, actually the day before, you saw, I think, the little hamburgers and the pins within zip codes. Again, you could do the same thing inside of a report very easily by running a query against the underlying spatial data in the database. Looking at 2008, we've actually spent a lot of time implementing this new feature called Tablix, and you may have seen it a little bit in the BI Power Hour if you went to that just previously, but I'll give you a much more in-depth look at it. But what it basically does, of course, is it completely combines the concepts of table and matrix, and I'll go through some of the details. We've got all the new charts and gauges that I just showed you, and the next thing is we've completely redone the report designer. We had to do that, of course, because a Tablix is very different than a table or a matrix or a list, but we also wanted to make it easier to use and add some of the enhancements that many of you have been asking for and commenting on in terms of our feedback to you both in these types of sessions as well as online. And one of the things that we've done is kind of look at how to make it much, much faster, much easier to lay out and build these reports. So one of the things we have is a new data pane. It's not just fields. It has many of the things that you want to go ahead and drag onto reports. We've simplified the dialogues and made them easier to use as well as easier to navigate. And actually, one of our strategies, and we're continuing to improve this, and the designer I'm going to show you today, of course, is a work in progress, is get to the point where, one, you don't have to use dialogues very often, And two, if you do have to use a dialog, you can get to exactly the dialog you want to without having to go through a very deep set of tabs or surfaces to go ahead and find the properties that you're looking for. An also strategy that I strive for is so that you should never have to really use the property browser. And many of you are probably developers and you love the property browser. But for those of you who aren't or just plain don't like to go hunt and find things in a property browser, our goal is that you don't have to use the property browser if you don't want to. So again, just simplifying that entire experience. Another thing you'll see is snap to line, zoom features. And I know probably almost all of you have requested this, unless you're just die-hard Visual Studio developers. You want to be able to build reports, but not be inside of Visual Studio. You know, Visual Studio is great if you've got projects and you're doing C# applications and you want to integrate with your source code control. But if that's not what you're looking for and you actually want to just simply go in and build a report and launch an application and not have all of the additional flexibility and features, but also overhead of Visual Studio, we're going to have a standalone version as well. And I'll show you some of the other things. One of the key points here, I know I made fun of it earlier, we got rid of the green triangle. We've absolutely improved it so you can go ahead and specify the style properties and all the layouts for subtotals in full flexibility and full fidelity right there on the surface. So what is a tablix? Well, a tablix is basically the marriage of a table and a matrix. So on the left-hand side, we have a table. On the right-hand side, we have a matrix. And of course, what a tablix does is take the two and put them together. I love that slide. Absolutely. So let's go ahead and try that again. Take a look at it nice and short here. That same person, Chris, who invented the green triangle, luckily came up with this slide. So somewhat forgiven. So let's see that one more time. And just because I know you want to see it again, we'll see it one more time. I know I love watching it. And of course, the key thing here is with a tablix, you can have dynamic columns, static columns, multiple levels of static and dynamic columns, dynamic rows, static rows, which again is something that was difficult to do in 2005, all alongside each other. So they can all kind of coexist in the same surface. All of those tricks, those things I just showed you, are completely unnecessary. It's a completely different form of doing it, and I'll go ahead and show you the designer and how much easier many of these things are. Now, of course, with all this kind of massive flexibility comes a little bit of complexity, and we're going to try to manage that as best as possible, and that's some of the stuff that we're still working on. We're adding many things like the grouping pane to go ahead and try to make sure it's as clear as possible what you're using. And all of you, just so you know, this functionality is not in the current CTP. It's not in the CTP that is available now in CTP 3. It will be most likely in CTP 4, which will be the next one. And what we want, of course, is for all of you to get that, try it out, give us your feedback, and tell us, you know, is this usable enough? Do you understand how to kind of build these types of reports now? And again, I already talked kind of about that. So what I want to go ahead and do is jump into the demo here and give you a look at the new report designer. And what I'm going to start with is did my resolution change? Yeah. Hold on one second. That should work for you. Hopefully all the rest of my demos weren't that way. What I'm going to go and do now is launch our new designer. And as you can see here, the first thing to take a look at is it's not in Visual Studio. That's both good and bad news. It means we just haven't done the Visual Studio part. But what we had to do, very different than with SQL Server 2005, is that the entire designer was built to be a Visual Studio designer. What we've done now is this one is specifically designed not to be in Visual Studio, and what we'll do is do the work to go ahead and integrate it in so that it can exist in both places. And so what we've started with first is kind of the outside experience to make sure we didn't take any dependencies on the Visual Studio surface, and we had everything up and running, and then we'll go ahead and plug it in. So let's kind of look at the surface itself. Clearly it's not done. This is even a debug build. I've got little test features here and there to go ahead and look at the different functionality kind of behind the surface. What we have here is, of course, the toolbar, which allows you to do all the formatting, very similar to the Designer in Visual Studio. We have the toolbox. Now, the interesting thing is with a Tablix, and in fact, if you guys are RDL experts out there, the RDL, of course, has changed with Tablix. And one of the key differences in the RDL is there's no more table, list, and matrix. They're all gone. There's only a Tablix. So it doesn't really matter whether I drop on a table, a matrix, or a list. The only thing that's different is kind of the starting point. In the end, you can get to all of the functionality from any of those different starting points. Another thing you see here is what we call the data pane. And we're going to add a lot of things in here. But what it allows you to do is very quickly get access to anything you might want to go ahead and drag and drop on the surface. Down here in the bottom, you'll see a lot more in the coming demonstration is what we call the grouping pane. And what the grouping pane allows you to do is visualize and access the groups in your report. I don't know how many of you have used it both. It's a little bit easier in a matrix, but certainly in a table. How do I get a hold of the group? You go over to the row selectors, you try to find the group, but groups are different than text boxes. Text boxes allow you to go ahead and set the style and the formatting, but if you want to set interactivity, you need to set it on the group so the entire group disappears. This allows you to go ahead and see in detail the actual group structure and modify it from there. Another thing, of course, we have now is a number of zooming support. So if you want to go ahead and get very fine-grained look and move around of your text boxes or fields, you'll be able to go ahead and do that using that closer look. Okay, so the first thing, of course, I want to go ahead and do is let's go ahead and build a Tablix. It doesn't really matter whether we start with table, matrix, or list. I'll actually start here. We'll show a real quick one just using a table. So the first thing, of course, we want to do is remind people that building a report without data, not very interesting. A lot of first-time users will come in and they'll drag on a text box and kind of forget to go ahead and get the data right away. What we want to do is go ahead and hint you, go ahead and build a data set. There are certain cases, I've done this before, where the only thing in the report is a whole bunch of sub-reports because you're combining a bunch of other reports together, but it's not as common of a scenario. So what I want to do is go ahead and get some data here. Another difference you'll see, is that we don't have a data pane. So we've kind of moved away from the data pane. We'd love to hear your feedback on that. And what you do instead, of course, is go ahead and I'll connect to my local database here. Connect to AdventureWorks. And again, this is just a temporary thing for creating queries, and I'll go ahead and just grab a query I've got here. This is basically the generic query designer that's in the existing report designer. So it does allow you to go ahead and create queries, view them, execute them. Now we're finished, and we have our data in the data pane. And of course, so very simple. Everything that used to work, of course, still works. This is what we are kind of first step at our new table. Again, it's still a matrix, still a Tablix, no matter what it looks like. And what we've kind of started off with is we've highlighted the header area as you don't really want to drop stuff here. Dropping fields in the header area isn't all that interesting unless what you want is a grand total up in the header. We also removed the footer row so that you're not looking at 3 different rows and wondering kind of where to stick things. It simply says, put your data here, and we'll go ahead and fill in the header. Another thing that we just very recently added, and I'm very excited about, is this kind of smart tag field picker. So you can see right here, anytime you're hovering in a text box, a Tablix is always bound to a data set. So you can simply click on that, and there's the list of fields for that Tablix. So if I wanted to go ahead and drop in sales, I can do that. If I want to go over here, drop in cost, go over here, drop in product category, I've now very quickly created what in the past was a simple table, and I can go ahead and preview that. Now in the current build, this is again a limitation. We just haven't got local mode up and running yet. And so what I need to do is I need to connect to a server to go ahead and preview this report, very similar to what we do with Report Builder. And so I'll just plug that in, and I can go ahead and preview that. And of course, there's our table, very quick and easy. So all that continues to work. we'll go ahead and delete that, and I'll drop on a matrix this time. And what I want to do, of course, is build a very similar report than what I just built using 2005 to give you an idea of what the different types of functionality is. So again, I can still use our little picker here. So I go ahead and choose sales. And on rows, previously, we had product category. And on columns, we had, what, years? So I've gone ahead and just clicked that very quickly. Another thing you're seeing here is that we're no longer showing equals fields bang sales dot value or equals sum of fields bang sales dot value. Because if you go back to the designer, in 2005, you can't even tell what that is, right? All it says is sum of field. It doesn't, obviously if you hover over it, you can go ahead and see it, and we provided some amount of context, but it wasn't as clear. In the new designer, what we go ahead and do is simply show you this is sum of sales, and of course it was average. It would say average of sales, or this is order year. And we put it in brackets to show you it's what we call a token. And if you click on it, of course, or you go into an expression, we'll actually show you the expression. So clicked on it there in this case, or if you go into again, this temporary expression editor, it's a text box, we'll actually show you the expression itself. But on the design surface, what we wanted to go ahead and do is show you as much of the valuable information as possible. So what I have here, of course, very clearly and very quickly, is a matrix showing product category and by years. And go ahead and format this so it's not huge. Not all the dialogues are done. And of course, we can preview that, and we'll see a pretty basic matrix. Now, the next thing I want to show you is the grouping area itself. So what we have here is we're selected our tablex, and two things you'll see is, one, we have these little highlight bars. The goal there is to show you what scope you're in when you're clicking on a text box. And this was telling you you're in both the order year scope and the product category scope, because, of course, it's dynamic on rows and columns. And you can actually see the groups down here. So you can see the product category group and the order year group. And to create new groups, we allow you, currently we don't allow you to drag on the surface, but we'll have that just like we had in 2005. But you can also simply drag things right into the grouping area. So if you go ahead and drag things down there, we automatically create those groups as well. And you can kind of interact with your groups differently than you're interacting with your layout surface. So there we have our product category and subcategory, year and quarter, and of course our sales in this case. And what we allow you to do, of course, is not only right-click here and get to properties for a group. Actually, that's properties for a text box. Edit group. But you can also simply go down here and edit a group. So it gives you both ways to go ahead and get access to those, as opposed to going to row selectors and other things that you did in 2005. We hope it's a little bit clearer and a little bit easier to go ahead and do. So now let's go ahead and take the next step, because what we had previously, of course, was dynamic columns, two sets of parallel dynamic columns. But let's go ahead and turn on subtotals first, actually. A little bit easier. So I've got now, you see our group, our little selectors here. We have the sum of sales, which says I'm both in the subcategory and the orders. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to click on the order, and I'm going to add a subtotal. And what that does, if I go ahead and click on the subtotal, you'll see that the group selector is now year. That subtotal belongs to the year, not to the order quarter. So what, of course, it will do is it will only repeat for every year, not for every quarter. And we're trying to convey that visually. Again, we'd love to hear your feedback in terms of how well that's working versus what we had in 2005. And unlike before, you actually get a new column. It's a real column. And you get a new text box. Now, if you wanted to make this average, you can make it average. If you wanted to make it count, it could be count. It can be a completely different expression than what's here. So very different than matrix, where subtotals were automatic. In a tablex, subtotals are now exposed. They're there. You have to look at them. But you also can do anything you want with them, specify their formatting, have different values, and so on. So I can also go, obviously, here and turn on subtotals. Now we've got a subtotal there. And let's go ahead and just, again, format these so that we don't see lots. The data in AdventureWorks is, they do a lot of sales. I wish I worked for AdventureWorks or owned AdventureWorks. They sell more bikes than I could possibly imagine. And we can go ahead and preview that report. And again, very similar to what we had before. But now if we wanted to go ahead and make this a stepped report, very similar to what we did previously. And actually, you follow the rules almost the same, except for you don't have to have the green triangle in the before piece, because subtotals are, again, on the surface. You don't have to kind of deal with are they before or are they after. You simply put them where you want them to be. So the same thing applies here. Instead of having the total, you put the product category there. And you can either move it, but in this case, what I want to go ahead and do is insert a new row above this one. So as you can see here, this is a product category row, but it's in the same column as the subcategory. And so I'll simply show the product category there. I'll go ahead and do our padding just like we did before. There's our padding. I don't need this row any longer. But I was showing sales. Again, I really love these smart tags. They make it much easier to go ahead and select values. And now, unlike a matrix before where you had to hide the column, in this case, you simply delete the column. It's not needed. It's completely flexible. Another thing you'll see here, I know I keep mentioning this, is we have a little difference between, you see these kind of double dashed lines here? What that's showing you is, and we haven't come up with a good name for it yet, is the area of your report that is grouping oriented. Things will are grouped by these values. And this is kind of the inside. This is the details area. And that'll exist for a table, of course. You spend all of your time in here. And for a matrix type of report, you're spending just the details of your report. So again, in this case, make these totals bold or whatever else you might want. And we preview that. We should now have a stepped matrix with all of our values. And, of course, we can turn on our show hide. So in the case of this one, this is what, text box 24. So I'll edit this group and set the visibility. And you can see here what we have is our new dialogues. Not quite done, of course, but providing a little bit more context about what you're doing, allowing you to select the multiple options. Again, these are kind of the larger dialogues. We'll be able to get to sub-pieces of them from the design surface as well. But hopefully a little bit more straightforward in understanding what pieces you're getting to, and all the functionality that's in the property grid will also show up there. So in this case, order year is what? Text box 8. And of course, again, just like before, I can actually go down here to and edit the group in the grouping pane and specify text box 8. And now when I preview that, we have all of our interactivity just like before, and we have our stepped matrix. And the last thing I want to go ahead and do is, of course, sort this group by quarter, so they actually come in the right order, and make these columns a little bit bigger so that you can see the values. All right, so now we've got basically that. Of course, I can keep going. I can add lots and lots of subtotals and do all the things you could do in Matrix before. But it was kind of difficult, obviously, in 2005 to go ahead and add that secondary dynamic group. And so what I'm going to do here is simply choose our matrix, and what I want to have is the regions on a group right next to it. So one of the ways to do that is simply go to Order You here, and you'll see we have an add group. And we've got a number of options for add group. You can add parent groups, groups that are at a higher grain than you or a lower grain, or groups before, to the left, or right, or after. So what I've done is I've chosen the outermost group, in this case here, and I want to add a group after. And, of course, what do I want to group on? I'm going to group on the region. So now what I've got is, if you select here, of course, you'll see that I'm in the scope of the order year. But if I go to this text box here, that's in the scope of the region and the product category. So the rows hierarchies are shared, but the columns are completely independent. And for sake of anything else, I'll go ahead and show sales. And what I want to do, of course, is I also want to show by both region and territory. So this is a little bit of a workaround in the current designer. It's, again, a work in progress. What I want to go ahead and do is add another group. So I'll drag in our territory. I drag it under the group one, so it automatically creates as a child. But one of the things you see here that's not quite perfect is it created another row. So this is the row for territory, and this is the row for quarter. And what, of course, I wanted was them to share the same row, be at the same level. So easy workaround today until we get this design a little bit easier is I can simply merge that. And what you're seeing, of course, here is another new feature, which is the ability to do row merges as well as column merges. So previously in 2005, you could do row spans. In the grouping area, with groups of the same scope, you can go ahead and merge cells very similar to what it can do in Excel. So now that I've merged them, I can go ahead and delete the row that I don't want. Oops. Not that one. Let's delete this one. And we can put our total back. And now we have all of our territories and regions as well as our years and quarters on the same matrix view in the same chart. So now, of course, if we go ahead and preview this, you'll see we have North America, Canada, and very easily, just like before, this is what, text box 27. I can edit this group, set up our visibility on text box 27. And now we have, unlike, of course, in 2005, where you couldn't have dynamic content, you couldn't have show hide on rows. Of course, with a tablex, you can have show hide on rows as well as columns with either static or dynamic columns or rows. So all of those things are available and possible. One of the next things I want to show, of course, with this, doing the static columns or the different values for subtotals or details is very easy because, of course, you have access to the subtotal itself. You can change it to be whatever you want. But I want to show you another feature that I'm very excited. I've got lots of things I'm excited about in this particular version because it's kind of the third version for us, and it gives us a chance to go ahead and take all of your feedback and start to incorporate a lot of things that you guys have been asking for and build that into the product. Is what I call, we have it in the previous 2005, it's called previous. And what it allows you to do is, in 2005, is simply get the previous row. But it's very, very powerful in 2008. So what I'll go ahead and do here is I'm going to add another column here. So I'm going to insert a row. Actually, I want to insert a column to the right. And, of course, what I've done there is I simply have more details now than I have subtotals, again, showing you the flexibility and the things that we really couldn't take advantage of in 2005 and some of the stuff I showed you how to work around. And what we've got here is what I want is to show the value from the previous quarter, for example. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's just show, to begin with, the sales. So there's sum of sales. But instead of showing the sum of sales for the current quarter, what I want to show is the sum of sales from the previous quarter. So in Q2, I want to see Q1. So what I need to do there is simply go into the expression for this, and I apologize a little bit for the smallness of the text, but I'll go ahead and talk to it. What I want to specify is give me the previous value for that quarter. So I'll simply type previous. And previous takes, just like the in-scope, both the expression, the thing I want to get, which is the sum of sales, but also the scope that I want to get it at. So if I want to get it for the previous quarter, I simply type in tablex2, and that's right down here in the grouping pane. Order quarter. And assuming I've typed everything correctly, we will format that as well. Now, one of the things you're seeing here is, in the case where we have a richer expression, something that's not simply field bang field name dot value, we go ahead and put in just the expression. Because again, just like in 2005, if it was a big, long expression, you probably couldn't read it anyway. What we want to tell you is there's an expression there. What you most likely want to do is right-click and go to the expression if what you want to do is edit it. Otherwise, of course, you could operate on it and set all the style properties just like you had before. So now if I run this, let's go ahead and have the same expression for this value. And I preview the report, and I go ahead and open up 2002, what we should see is the wrong data. Yes, I know. I was formatted. It's interesting that that says select. Maybe we found a bug. What do you think? Oh, did I really? That's funny. Actually. No, it's not. There we go. And what I've got here, of course, is now that I'm able to see in quarter 2, the sales for quarter 1, and in quarter 3, the sales for quarter 2. Now that's pretty powerful. That's great for showing things like growth from last quarter, which is something I've been asked to do many times in reports in SQL Server, for example. But even more powerful than that, and one of the things that we like to look at is, you know what, I don't want to see our sales from the last quarter. What I want to do is I want to see the sales for the previous year in the same quarter. And so that's even harder to do, obviously. You try to write the SQL for that, it's a royal pain. But now with using the previous function, the only thing I have to do is go ahead and go into this expression. And instead of saying order quarter here, what I'm going to do is simply say, I want to look at it for order year. So I want to go up all the way to the order year group, and then come back down and find the same value for the group expression for the quarter as was in this value, but in the previous instance of that group. So I'll simply change that to year in both places. And now when I go ahead and view it, and I expand 2002, I see nothing because, of course, it's not all that interesting. There is no previous year. There is no 2001 to show. But if I go ahead and open up 2003, you'll see, if you remember from 2002 here, 175,000. And what we have here, of course, is 175,000. So we're getting the previous quarter's value for that next year. And of course, when it's a little bit more interesting, and I'll grab just simply the expression here, because what we really wanted is probably something more like, and it's a standard expression, is maybe the growth, not just the value. So here we'll simply go into the expression itself. And of course, that's simply the calculation for growth. And now we'll do it in terms of a percent. And if I pasted everything in correctly, we can go into 2003 and we can see the growth over 2001, or 2002 in this case. And of course, what I didn't do is I got pound error, because what I've done is I've tried to divide by 0 in essence, because I tried to get the value from the previous year and it doesn't exist. So one of the things you may want to do in the future, if you're using this functionality, is you'll actually bring back the previous year's data, even if you're not showing it, to use within the previous function, and then hide that group. So go ahead and specify for the visibility on the group to hide that instance of that group the first year, so that it's not shown, but all of the values, of course, can be used in the growth calculation. Then lastly, I think what I wanted to go ahead and show you is a little bit of a preview of the Dundas chart stuff that we've started to integrate. And again, we've just started to integrate this into the design surface. And so I can go ahead and take a chart. Let's show you what other piece of functionality that we think is a little bit more usable as well. So I've got the name of our chart here, I don't know, our report. We got all the standard formatting, just like previous. Oops. Yeah. Luckily, you guys are okay, right? And we can go ahead and drag on our chart. So one of the things I wanted to start off with showing you, because I did forget to show you earlier, was the snap to line. So not only are snap to lines, so you can go ahead and drag around this chart, and you can see if you wanted to go ahead and have it line up exactly with the edge of that text box, you can go ahead and line up with the exact edge of that side. You can have it line up with the edge of this side, the top of it, the bottom of it. It's even more powerful if we were to drag on, say, a matrix here. And I'll just end up deleting this, so I'll just put it on here really quickly. You can actually line things up with items inside of other items. So there's the other edge, there's the inner edge. So if you had a very complex table X, you could actually start to line things up very, very easily and very quickly using that the snap to lines that you may be familiar with using in Visual Studio. So anyway, what we've got is our chart here. And very similar to previously, I can go ahead, or in 2005, I can drag on our items. So if I want to look at sales and by product category. But now I want to go ahead and, liven it up, make it look a little bit nicer than maybe we could do in 2005 or take advantage of some additional features. The first thing, let's go ahead and look at that chart. We can see is that, bikes, wow, we sell a lot of bikes. We don't sell a lot of clothing and accessories. And one of the challenges, of course, with that is you can't really see the values there. It's just, it's too overwhelming with bikes. So one of the features I wanted to go ahead and enable is the access breaks. So go ahead and allow us to see those details without it being completely hidden by the fact that we sell a lot of bikes. So what I can do is go ahead and go into properties for the chart here, and as you see, there's a lot more properties. All the stuff from Dundas moves over. And in fact, if you purchase and use Dundas today, we will automatically upgrade all of those Dundas charts to be Reporting Services 2008 charts. So all that will just happen for you. So any investment you do today within Dundas will just migrate straight over. So one of the things I might want to do, of course, is add a little bit nicer of a border here. And just to try to show you, instead of having to be gray, what I really want to show you is just kind of the ability for you to choose colors. So previously, colors, of course, were limited to pretty much the name colors. But now, not only can you do, obviously, all of the name colors like before, you can also specify a degree of transparency, right, for any of the values. So there we go. Now we have our kind of chart called sales. And again, not everything's all hooked up, so I'll just show you a couple of things. But the next thing I wanted to go ahead and do was turn on those line breaks. So the y-axis, it's very simple. You simply check on the checkbox, and within the product, of course, we will figure out the right place to do all the line breaks, or the axis breaks. So I'll go ahead and choose OK there. And when I go ahead and run the report, you'll see that we've added 2 axis breaks in this case, between 8 million and 1 million, and then again up in the 61 million range, if I'm counting the numbers right. So again, what we've got allowed to do is go ahead and now see the specific details inside of the chart itself and also get all of the data. The next thing, and one of the most common features requested by probably everyone in this room, is what you want to be able to do is have a secondary axis. You don't just want to have the one y-axis. You want to show something else on this chart, but they're sharing the same x-axis. And of course, now with 2008, we'll enable that as well. So what I'm going to go ahead and do here is I'll go grab the expression again, simply because I don't want to have you guys sit here and wait for me to type it. I'm just going to go ahead and calculate the profit. So I'll drop on, it doesn't really matter, cost, and we'll change the expression. In this case, what we want to do is go ahead and show the profit. And unlike in 2005 again, you can mix any different types of charts. So I could obviously show this as a bar, but in this case, I don't know, I want to pick something, I'll go ahead and pick a scatter. So this is going to be a mixed bar and scatter chart. on the same surface. And let's go ahead and turn on labels. Again, I'm probably getting outside the range here. Who knows if all these pieces will end up working. And so what I've got here is now a mixed bar and scatter chart. And the next thing I would do, even though it's not hooked up in the dialogues, is for sales, what I want to do is I want to put it on not on the standard primary axis, I want to put it on the secondary axis. So what I've done now is create a right-hand axis, or the secondary axis. And if I go into the properties for the chart under axis, I can go ahead and go to the secondary Y, for example. And if I want to change the formatting, I could change that, obviously, independently from the other axis. Now, again, I don't think it actually saves that value, or I'll be able to preview it, but you can see here, you'll be able to have the different values for the different axes. And then when I go ahead and run the report, you'll see that I've got my two different chart types with my axis breaks, with two different axes, showing both the profit and the sales. So again, a lot of flexibility. If you go ahead and look at the properties for the dialogue, it's not done yet, but it's just amazing in terms of the amount of flexibility you'll now have with charts. All we've integrated so far is the charting technology. Our next step will be integrating the gauges that I showed you, and then lastly, going ahead and adding in all of the maps. I guess one other thing I can quickly show you is just kind of the powerful or ease of use of the now data pane. What we've done now is not only do you have the data here, your fields that you can drag onto the surface, but you've also got things like images. Let's go ahead and say I wanted to drop in an image up here. Add in our logo. So there's our logo here. You can align it. All of the images now show up right here. So if I want to add that logo in again, I can simply just drag that on. So it's very easy to go ahead and get access to images. Similarly, if this report had parameters, all your parameters would show up there. You don't have to go into a dialog or a menu item to go ahead and get your parameters or move them around or edit them. Same thing with built-in functions. So a lot of times people want to add the next page or the last page. In this case, I'll put in the execution time. It really doesn't matter. I can just go ahead and drag that onto the surface. What we'll do is we'll stick a number of different common expressions in there so that you can go ahead and drag those on very easily from the data pane. Hopefully, you got a good experience or a view of what the new designer would look like. Of course, it'll also be integrated into into Visual Studio. So you'll have both experiences completely integrated with Visual Studio as well as standalone. With that, of course, I'm happy to open it up to questions and fill out your evaluations. This session is repeated, so if you have other coworkers that didn't get a chance to make it, it is repeated on Friday, and so hopefully go ahead and get another view. Are there any questions? Yes. Walk to the microphone really quick.
I just had a quick question on the backwards compatibility with 2005. Will the RDL continue to support the table and list semantics?
So in terms of backward compatibility, what's going to happen is if you install the 2008 version of the server, you can publish reports that are in the 2005 RDL, but when they go up on the server, they'll be upgraded. So they'll be converted to the 2008 RDL.
So if we built, say, an object model that generates that, we'll have to go in and upgrade all that?
Yeah, you don't have to upgrade that. We'll continue to use those, and you'll be able to publish those. Now, I believe, and I'm pretty sure, if you were to ask for the RDL back from the server, you're going to get 2008 RDL. Because okay. we can't deconvert it, because there's just features that we can't unconvert. So as long as you're using projects, to manage it, and you have your source RDLs on your file system or someplace, you can continue to publish those, and all of it will continue to work. All of your old apps should continue to work.
Okay, that's kind of a segue into the next part of my question. I heard rumor that you'll supply an object model for the RDL with 2008.
Well, that is a very nice rumor. We're looking. We're absolutely looking into that. The good news is we have one. We built one for this version to enable a lot of the functionality you see here within the designer. So it does exist. The real question is whether we go ahead and take the next step of finishing up the robust set of testing we want to do to give it to you, as opposed to just kind of for our own use. And realistically, that's really the only question. And I'm 90% sure we'll probably do it.
That'll make a lot of people happy.
And it sounds like you all want it, so it's great feedback.
Hi, my name's Kathy, and I was wondering if you could give your perspective on if we have Performance Point with SharePoint running, and we kind of come from the world of scorecard with integration with reporting services, and now we're seeing reporting services with all the capabilities of Dundas. You know, what's that vision if we're doing a strategic roadmap with our customers? What are we talking about 12 months from now if they're trying to do digital dashboards? What are we talking about?
Well, it's an ongoing evolution. So I think what you're getting at is which products should you be using? Should you be using reports? Should you be using scorecards? And the answer for the near future, of course, is it depends on which capabilities you need the most. If you're using all the functionality within the scorecarding and setting up your balanced scorecards and you want to visualize those, it's a very quick and easy way to go ahead and plop in different types of gauges. If you want all the functionality, of course, of Dundas in the 2008 time frame, you can build KPIs and scorecards inside of a report. Now, you know, my own opinion, of course, is that you end up getting a lot more with a report, but unfortunately it's a little bit different. It's not, you can have the different SharePoint web parts and you can put them and build a dashboard, but also with reports, it's a little bit easier to set up different types of parameters, have a little bit different interactivity, but also output to all kinds of different formats. If you want to get your scorecard in PDF, you can't do that with Balanced Scorecard Manager, but you can do it with a report. So again, it really depends on the functionality you think you need. Longer term, absolutely, we're working closely with that team to bring the technologies closer together, and you will see that at some point. I just can't commit to when.
Quick follow-up. Would you be saying multiple years, year, 10 years?
As soon as we possibly can. It's not going to be 10
Thank
years,
you.
but it's not going to be a year either.
Okay, thank you.
When comparing, I'm starting to use a lot more SRS from another popular reporting tool that...
I'm very glad to hear that.
Yeah, that although I like a lot of what I see in SRS, the way in which both SQL and SRS handles the marriage of the date and time that comes out of SQL for grouping and sorting, I can't find any good way to do that without some SQL hacks, basically, to bring in the data that costs me on SQL performance to like do a group by hour.
Sure.
Now, I can do that very, very, or give me all the data from last week. I can do that with one line of code, or one line, essentially, in the other popular reporting tool, and I can't find a way to do it almost at all in SRS.
Yeah, maybe we should take that offline. I mean, doing something like that is actually, I believe, relatively straightforward. You can simply use the CLR functions for time. You bring back the date time from SQL Server, and you can group by hour. You can go ahead and filter for, yesterday. All of those things are enabled because you have the full CLR at your disposal, and you have all the date functions that are there. Mm-hmm. Of course, in 2008, the relational database, they've separated out date and time as two separate fields as an option for you. Okay. And so it's even easier using the 2008 relational database, but all of what you currently talked about should be very straightforward in the existing product. And so if you want to come up afterwards, I can kind of go through that and talk through more. Or, of course, any of us down, there's about 4 reporting services people down in the hall, and you can ask that question there, too.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Sure.
Sorry. So the 08 design service, a lot of great stuff there, but I got to ask the have my cake and eat it too question. My biggest pet peeve is exactly what you hit at least 5 times during the demo. You get halfway through it, I need to know what that text box number is. Close it out. The dialog box has like 4 miles of space beside the text box number. Can't you just show me the value that's in that text box? When I'm picking visibility,
sure,
right? You go to that dialog box, you drop the drop down, you show me text box 23, and then 4 miles of white space beside it.
So here?
No, you're trying to set a visibility in the expression builder.
Yeah, so visibility.
For the matrix. For like a matrix.
Doesn't matter. Okay, is that where you want to be?
Right.
Whatever.
So you make it hidden. Visibility can be toggled by another report item. drop that down. Can't you just show me the value that's in those text boxes over there on the right? You know, the expression?
Sure.
Am I crazy?
We could easily show you the token.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the same thing you show me on the design surface
Sure.
would work 98% of the time.
Sure. Good feedback. Absolutely. Now, in the end, hopefully, those won't be called text boxes anymore. They'll have good names, and they'll be easier to pick. But absolutely, in the case where those aren't, we can give you more contextual data.
Hello. I have a question. Is it possible to combine data from different data sets in one table, metrics, or?
So one thing we're not implementing in 2008 is the ability for you to basically do an in-report join of two different data sets, which is what you would have to do. Just taking two different data sets and putting them in a tablix doesn't solve your problem. What you have to do is join the data over some key.
Right.
What you want to do, of course, normally is do that across two different data sources, right? Because that's why you couldn't join it to begin with. We've heard that request many times, and it's definitely on our list. I'm sure you can understand the complexity of not only doing the join. SQL Server has a lot of logic for doing both inners and outers, and we could implement all of that as well. It's a little bit more involved, so we haven't done it yet. So the answer is still no, unfortunately. You could issue a query that joined those two together in some database like SQL Server using OpenRowSet or something, and so that's one workaround for it, but it's not built into the report itself yet.
Okay, and it's not coming in 2008.
It won't be in 2008, that's correct.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I had a handful of questions that I listed. First, the pricing structure for SSRS right now is right.
Good, thank you.
Is it going to stay that way?
I don't think we've released pricing for SQL Server 2008 yet. We're certainly looking at, as with every release, we look at the best way to price the product so that we can get it in all of your hands and with the best price. I mean, it's obviously based on competition. It's based on what we need to do in terms of where the market is.
Sure. Well, as a value-added product, it's great. But one big stumbling block for us adopting it has been the uncertainty. Hey, is Microsoft going to get us hooked and then, the first hit's free?
That's certainly not our strategy. Absolutely not. And, when we look at pricing, we mostly just look at which set of features should go in enterprise versus standard, and what types of packaging are you telling us you would like to have. So, again, those are more the options that we look at as opposed to taking something away unless we absolutely have to.
Okay. The next question I had was in the expression builder, in the expression editor, is there some plan to integrate some kind of IntelliSense or
well, we have
builders
IntelliSense in this expression editor. So in Visual Studio, absolutely. In terms of the standalone report designer, we'll have to look at that because in Visual Studio we actually use the code window, which gives us the IntelliSense functionality kind of built in as long as we hook it up. Outside of Visual Studio, we would have to figure out or write our own means of doing that. So it'll definitely be in Visual Studio. The question is whether or not it'll be in the standalone designer, and we'll look into that. We actually have a very rich design for the expression builder for the standalone version. The real question is whether or not IntelliSense shows up or not, and I just don't know at this point. Our hope is absolutely yes.
Okay. When I put together one report, I needed to put together a custom function. Now, I'm a C# programmer. And, of course, that only accepts VB.NET. And I was pulling my hair out on that. Is there any plan to integrate C#?
Yes, I mean, it most likely won't happen in 2008, given, just so you guys know, the coding window for 2008 is pretty much over. We will finish probably at the end of the summer if we stay on schedule for shipping in the beginning of next year, which is absolutely the plan. So we're just about done. I have been talking with Visual Studio. The main reason we don't support the other languages today is we have to parse them. Things like there are reporting functions that are kind of embedded within your language, so we end up having to parse those pieces out and do different manipulations of the code. We haven't written a parser for C#, but I have been working with the Visual Studio team for them to provide us parsers for all of their languages so we can support all of the .NET languages instead of just VB.NET.
But probably not in this version.
Probably not in 2008.
Okay. And my final question.
Now, you can use external code, of course, and write it whatever language you want, but
sure,
within the code block itself, we...
Okay. The other very popular report format. Are you working on, is there any plans for any conversion tools to aid in the process of migrating from the
Some other vendor?
Right, some other vendor to...
We've certainly looked at different types of conversions. You know, obviously we have one from Access. Right now, we're primarily utilizing vendors, and there's a number of vendors outside that provide conversion utilities. One of the big challenges and the kind of the reasons we haven't done them so far is that the report you get out of a conversion, unfortunately, isn't the report you'd want to build. If you look at even our table today, it's very different than many of the competitors' banded structure. And so what you get on a normal conversion are lists with text boxes, which is not really what you want.
Yeah. Well, I know it's a difficult task because they're just so disparate, but I know for me, you know, even if it got me 70% of the way there and I just had to fix it,
I completely agree with you, and we have considered it, and it's things we're looking at. But for now, you know, we have a number of vendors that provide that type of support, and so we're kind of leveraging that right now.
Thank you.
Just two quick questions. One, have you ever looked at a can grow that grows horizontally instead of vertically?
Absolutely. One of the things, you know, not in 2008. I mean, we have a lot of requests for things like that where you can go ahead and have different amount of change in size. Also, people have asked for being able to have expressions for the XY. So there's a number of requests like that. We'll stack it up with all the other requests. Unfortunately, there's a number of things that are requested slightly more than that, so it's not in this version.
Oh, and one question, we currently use Dundas for reporting services.
Right.
Is there plans to integrate the calendar component from
Yes, we did buy the calendar and barcode, and we certainly plan to. Right now, it's just a matter of how much, again, since we just purchased the technology, how much we can integrate before we need to shut down for 2008.
Cool, thanks.
Yep, absolutely. Are we done? I wasn't paying attention. So I'll go ahead and answer questions downstairs, and I get ready for the next session. Thanks a lot.